So you are looking at a 2008 Audi Q7, which would be just another boring regular Q7. But it's not that boring and not that regular if you know the mileage this car has. So let's first check out the mileage, which is 511,000 kilometers. Now, that's pretty high mileage, and it's definitely a bit more interesting than your usual Q7 with 200,000 kilometers or 300,000 kilometers. But let's start with the exterior. Let's start with the front of the car. From the footage, it looks pretty damn good. However, there is a big amount of stone chips on the hood, as you can see. Obviously, this is nothing unusual if we take into consideration the mileage. But interestingly, this hood was already repainted once. And how the f I know? Because there is a paint drip right here, as you can see. Then of course there are the headlights, which are the original headlights, or at least they should be the original headlights from 2008. And they are, well, they are a bit faded. And at night the performance of these headlights is pretty shit. What can I say? On the other side, if we look closely at the front bumper, then we can see that there are basically no stone chips. I mean, of course there are some stone chips and some dents and scratches. However, these imperfections are not that visible as the big stone chips on the hood itself. But obviously, the front bumper was repainted as well. And there are actually some paint drips right here. So, I guess basically the whole front of the car was already repainted. However, the other parts of the body look actually pretty good. But these Q7s have some weak spots, so if we look right at the door handles, specifically at the end of the door handles, then you will see some rust. Right here, as you can see, there is already some rust, which is a common place on these cars, which is gonna rust mainly on cars used on winter salty roads. And even here, on the rear door handle, you can see the little tiny rust bubbles. Then there is some more rust on this rear door. You can see that here is some funny rust, but I mean, this rust is still not really big or major. Let me show you the other side. On the other side you can see the same interesting rust bubbles around the door handle ending. And there is some more rust on this door edge as well. And actually, I almost forgot, let's go back to this side, because here is a bit more rust on the body. Of course, there are some other tiny imperfections on the body, some dents and shit, but they are still not starting to rust that much, which is a positive thing. However, let's go back to this other driver's side, because one of the previous owner was a bit creative here. So, as you can see, he basically painted this bigger paint chip or bigger rust spot with some paint. And, I mean, from the closer look it looks like shit, but if you take a look from a distance, then you can't see shit, which is pretty positive, I guess. But interestingly, on the driver's door there is basically no rust. There is no rust around the door handle, and also there is no rust on the other part of the door. Overall, the paint job on the body is basically a factory paint job, except the front of the car, but the other parts of the body have a factory paint job still. And to be honest, it looks pretty fucking good considering the mileage. Obviously the wheels, the paint on the wheels is chipping on all of the wheels, on all four wheels. I mean, they are completely trash. There is nothing more I can tell you about them. Okay, before we check out the interior more closely, let's check out the engine in this car. This engine, this champion, this worldwide champion, which has 511,000 kilometers. So this is a 3-liter TDI V6 diesel engine with 176 kilowatts. Yeah, I mean, these are overall really reliable engines. So if you want to buy a Q7 or basically any Audi with this engine, then you are most probably not doing a bad decision. So, the engine in this car is original. It is the engine which was mounted in the factory back in 2008. And also the gearbox is still the original gearbox from the factory. However, on the engine there are some things which were already replaced. And I mean, these things which were already replaced on this engine, you have to expect that those things are gonna fail on all of these engines sooner or later. So let me start with let's start with the fuel system, with the injectors. There are 6 injectors on this engine, obviously, and there is a high pressure fuel pump which is right here. Now, the high pressure fuel pump in this engine is a infamous CP4 Bosch high pressure fuel pump, which is gonna fail sooner or later. In this case, this high pressure fuel pump failed at 450,000 kilometers. And if this high pressure fuel pump fails, then it will obviously destroy the injectors, because it will throw small metal particles in the fuel rail and in the fuel system and shit. So at 450,000 kilometers, the high pressure fuel pumps and all of the injectors were replaced. Then the turbocharger was already replaced, again somewhere around 450,000 kilometers. But of course, the turbocharger can fail much earlier than 450,000 kilometers. I mean, that depends mainly on the previous owner, I mean the owner of the car, and how he is using the car. Then the next thing which was already replaced are the intake manifold flaps, which are right under this metallic intake manifold. They are basically there. So all of those intake manifold flap mechanism, all of that was already replaced back in 2012. And it was replaced with the intake manifold electronic actuators. One is here and one is here. I mean, there are 2 mechanisms of the intake manifold flaps, one on this side and one on this side. However, nowadays you can buy some repair kits for these intake manifold flaps, and some owners even delete them. There were some seals and some hoses of the coolant system which were already replaced as well on this engine. But really, other than this, and obviously some sensors, what is it, O2 sensor or some kind of a crap, that was already replaced. And yeah, I guess that's really all what was replaced on this engine. So you have to keep in mind that those things are gonna fail sooner or later, as these things which I mentioned earlier. Then on these engines, you also should keep in mind that there is this crankshaft pulley. That big mofo right there is the crankshaft pulley, which is gonna sooner or later disintegrate, basically, and mainly because of rust. As you can see, this is already rusty, but I have seen worse. But all you need to know is that you should definitely replace this crankshaft pulley. Basically, you should replace it preventively, because if that pulley is gonna fall apart, and it is gonna fall apart, then you basically are gonna end up being stranded, because all of your accessory shit, so the water pump, the power steering, the AC compressor, the alternator, all of that is not gonna work if your crankshaft pulley will fall apart. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. The condition of this engine right now is actually not that bad. I don't know if you can see it, but there is a slight oil leak. There is a slight oil leak from the valve covers. On this side, I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, you can see it. There is a slight oil leak. Well, not really a slightly bigger oil leak from both of these valve covers and from the seals around the injectors as well. So yeah, that should be replaced, but it's still not a catastrophic issue of this engine right now. Yeah, and what about the timing chain? That is really an interesting topic, since this engine has a timing chain at the back of the engine. So the timing chain is located there. On this engine, the timing chain should be still the original from the factory. And the condition of this timing chain on this particular engine is, I mean, it is interesting. It is definitely worn. It is gonna be worn on this engine because during cold start, I sometimes hear a very short rattling noise from the timing chain, which obviously indicates that it's already worn out more or less. But to be honest, if we talk about the timing chain on these engines, then there are not many cases of catastrophic engine failures because of the timing chain. But I'm not saying that there are none, because obviously the timing chain can fail, can skip a tooth and destroy your engine. But you know, depends on the owner if he is willing to replace the timing chain, because to replace the timing chain on this particular engine and basically on all of these engines, you have to remove the whole engine. Yeah, and I mean that's not really positive, and it is a bit more expensive. Plus, I have to mention a very common oil leak of these engines in these cars. So if you will see oil drips on the rear of the engine where the engine meets the gearbox, then there is a very high chance that your rear main seal is leaking, which is also the case of this particular car. The bad thing is that to repair this leak, the engine has to be removed. And I guess that's all for this engine. As I said, the condition of this engine right now seems pretty good. There is no oil loss, and it seems like that there is no coolant loss either. Yeah, that would be it, I guess, for the engine. But let me talk about a bit about the engine ECU, which is under this plastic cover. The engine ECU on these cars can basically fail, and it can fail because of water damage. So the water will slowly drip on this ECU because these funny people in Germany were not able to put any kind of a cover on the top of this ECU. So the water will drip on it, and it will slowly leak into the ECU, and it will destroy it. And that shit costs like 2,000 euros, brand new. A brand new ECU costs around 2,000 euros, which is definitely not very positive if we think about the fact that the ECU damage can be prevented. Let me put back this cover onto this damage. I mean, these engines are really not bad. I mean, the fuel consumption is good, as well as the power of these engines. So yeah, I would definitely recommend them, but you should definitely keep extra money for the things I already talked about a bit earlier. I guess we can move on. We can move on finally to the interior of this car, which is in a exceptionally good condition if we consider the mileage of this car. The door panel, I mean, the door panel looks really good. Obviously there is some wear and tear on the plastic parts of this door panel, but it's still okay. However, there is a small crack on this door panel. This is a commonplace on these cars which can crack. I mean, it's not really nice, but who gives a But if we look at the driver's seat, then you can see that it's basically in a fantastic condition considering the mileage. I mean, this driver's seat looks like from a car with 200,000 kilometers. Obviously there is some wear and tear on the sides, but I mean, that really is nothing considering the mileage. Then there is the steering wheel, and as you can see, the steering wheel, I have seen in many cases I have seen much worse steering wheels on these cars in a much worse shape. I mean, again, this steering wheel looks like from a car with 200,000 kilometers. Of course, there is some wear mainly on this side, but again, it's still in a great condition considering the mileage. Okay, let me just show you the interior a bit more closely. So all the buttons are basically in a great condition without much wear. However, on this MMI panel you can see a couple of really small places where the plastic coating is starting to wear out, but it's still nothing horrible. However, this looks pretty shit. I mean, this is a chrome trim, which is basically some plastic part with some metallic foil on it. However, it's not that expensive to buy and it's very easy to replace actually. Other than this, the passenger seat looks pretty damn good, and there is also a panoramic sunroof which actually works. This is a pretty annoying part of this interior, the front armrest, which is, yeah, it is definitely not the highest quality part on this car. It's squeaking and rattling and Other than this, the front, I mean, there is enough space in the front, so I don't think you will have issues with space in the front. And you will definitely not have issues with space in the rear either, because there is enough space and the rear seats are pretty comfortable too. So, yeah. There is enough knee room and there is also enough headroom, even though it's not that generous as, for example, in a VW Touareg or in a Land Rover Discovery or in a big Range Rover. Partly it's because of the panoramic sunroof, but well, such is life. Other than this, the equipment of this car is not bad at all. There are many different things like these sunshades, for example. That's a nice feature. It also has rear heated seats, which is also not a bad feature. But of course there are also cars which have the 4-zone AC on the rear and all that stuff you can and you can't imagine. You can obviously put your rear armrest down. There are some funny cup holders right here. And again, I have to say that the condition of this car, mainly the condition of the interior, is really nice. Really nice, considering the mileage. Yeah, pretty damn nice, to be honest. It also has the optional Bose sound system. However, you could also have the better Bang & Olufsen sound system on these cars, but that's another story. This car also has electronic tailgate, which is still working, even though the closing function doesn't work. I mean, yeah, it is sometimes working and sometimes it's not working, but it always at least opens without issues. The trunk of this car is pretty damn big. It's wide and it's long. However, the height of the trunk space is a bit disappointing, to be honest. Let me just shut this trunk. Hey, and now it's working, but as I said, sometimes the closing is not working, sometimes it's working. It's a very funny trunk opening mechanism. Yeah, in the rear, we already have been in the rear. As I said, it's in a good condition and the passenger seat is also in a pretty damn good condition. Yeah, I mean, we should finally start this car, I guess, and go for a test drive, because what kind of a video would it be without a test drive of this high mileage Q7? So let me just start this thing. Yeah, as I said, it starts without any issues. Let me put the AC down, and actually almost everything on this car is working. The AC is working, the blower motor is working, even the navigation system is working. I mean, even though the maps are I don't know from which year, but it's pretty crazy that even the navigation system on this car is working without any issues. And what about the panoramic sunroof? Well, let's open it. Yeah, it is working, as you can see. But you should really keep in mind that if you are buying a Q7 with this kind of a panoramic sunroof, then you have to clean the water drains of this sunroof and even repair them, because the connectors basically on these drains can leak water, and they can leak water not only on the floor of the interior but also in the rear. They can leak water directly onto your amplifier, navigation system unit, radio unit, and all of this. And obviously, if you got water in those various electronic modules, then they are gonna fail, and they are pretty damn expensive to fix. However, you can watch my video about this used Q7 and get to know a bit more about this car and the issues it can have, because I'm not interested right now to explain you all of the issues these Q7s can have. As I said, basically everything is working, even though the driver's side seat heating is not working on this car. But I mean, really, that's really just a minor detail, to be honest. So, how this Q7 drives? Well, it drives pretty good, considering the mileage, of course. There is some rattling and some ticking from the panoramic sunroof, which is a bit annoying, but that's how life is. Other than this, the car feels really heavy, but it is a heavy car. The engine has enough power, still enough power, and the gearbox shifts smoothly. However, the torque converter is already a bit worn, because at lower RPMs there is sometimes a fluctuating and also a slight vibration and grinding noise. This car has a adaptive air suspension, which is comfortable and which still works. All the shock absorbers, all the air struts on this car are still the original air struts from 2008, and I mean, they are still working. There is a slight air leak from the rear air struts. The rear air struts are already leaking, but very slightly. There is a very slight air leak, which I will show you on this footage. So the car is not gonna drop like completely after a couple of days, but it is already dropping a bit. However, let's be honest, these air struts do have 500,000 kilometers on them, so I mean, it is a complete miracle that they are still working as they are still working. Other than this, the car is fairly quiet. You can still cruise at highway speeds without bigger issues, and even the steering is still pretty damn tight. I mean, I would expect at this mileage some loose steering or loose suspension or something, but absolutely not. The steering is still tight, still a bit, I mean, precise. Of course, we can't say that the steering on this car has great feedback or it's very precise, but it's still kind of precise. the feedback is still good, and the car still feels very stable on the road and even at highway speeds. So as you can see, even the acceleration is not that bad. So I mean, in conclusion, I have to say that the car drives like a car with 200,000 or 300,000 kilometers, more or less, which is pretty damn crazy if you look at the mileage. Of course, there are some engines which are not that reliable as this one. Mainly the petrol engine, the V8 petrol engine, is not that reliable as this particular engine. But yeah, I mean, if you choose the right engine in this car, and if you find one which is in a good condition and which has reasonable mileage, not like this with 500,000 kilometers, then I think that this really is not the worst used car choice. And I mean, it's still working, damn it. It's still working. Except the worn torque converter, obviously. It is still working pretty damn good. It's not the fastest car in the world, but still okay.